The massive power failure plunged the entire venue into darkness, killing every amplifier and spotlight. But Elvis did something in that pitch-black arena that created magic nobody had ever experienced before. It was March 17th, 1975, at the Spectrum Arena in Philadelphia, and Elvis was in the middle of what many considered one of his strongest performances of the year. He'd already electrified the crowd of 18,000 with That's All Right, Burning Love, and Jailhouse Rock. The energy was incredible, the band was tight, and Elvis was in one of those magical moods where everything he touched turned to gold. He'd just launched into Suspicious Minds, hitting those powerful high notes that always drove the crowd wild, when suddenly everything went black. Not just the stage lights, everything. The amplifiers went silent, the spotlights died, the exit signs went dark, and 18,000 people found themselves sitting in complete and total darkness. The silence was deafening. What had happened was a complete power grid failure that affected not just the Spectrum Arena, but 6 city blocks around it. A transformer had exploded 3 miles away, cutting electricity to everything in the area. This wasn't just a venue problem. This was a city-wide emergency. In the darkness, you could hear the confused murmur of 18,000 people trying to figure out what was happening. Some people were using cigarette lighters to see. Others were calling out to friends and family members. A few people near the exits started to leave, thinking the show was definitely over. On stage, Elvis stood in the pitch-black darkness, unable to see his band members, unable to see the audience, unable to even see his own hands. The wireless microphone system was dead. The electric guitars were silent. The keyboards were useless. Everything that made an Elvis concert had been wiped out in an instant. Most performers would have called it a night. Most venues would have evacuated everyone immediately for safety reasons. Most audiences would have demanded refunds and gone home. But this was Elvis Presley, and he was about to prove why he was called the King. After about 2 minutes of confused murmuring in the darkness, a single voice cut through the arena. "Hey, Philadelphia, y'all still out there?" It was Elvis, projecting his voice as loudly as he could without amplification. His natural speaking voice, trained by years of performing, carried surprisingly well through the arena's acoustics. Elvis came the response from thousands of voices in the darkness. "Well, I can't see y'all, but I can sure hear you," Elvis said. And you could hear the smile in his voice. "Looks like we got ourselves a little situation here." The crowd laughed, relieved to hear that Elvis was still there and wasn't giving up on the show. "Now I could make some joke about this being the darkest audience I've ever played for," Elvis continued. "But I think we can do something better than jokes tonight." What Elvis said next would become legendary in concert history. "Somebody get me an acoustic guitar." In the darkness, crew members fumbled around backstage until they found Charlie Hodges' backup acoustic guitar. They carefully made their way across the stage, guided only by the sound of Elvis's voice, and handed him the instrument. "All right, Philadelphia," Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the darkness. "I've never done a show like this before, but I figure there's a first time for everything." He strummed the acoustic guitar once, and the simple, pure sound rang through the arena like a bell. "Y'all are about to get the most intimate Elvis show in history. Just me, this guitar, and whatever songs we can remember together." Elvis started with "Love Me Tender," the song that had made him famous, and the one that worked best with simple acoustic accompaniment. But this wasn't the polished, orchestrated version that people knew from his records. This was raw, immediate, and incredibly personal. Singing in the darkness, without lights or staging or any of the visual elements that usually accompanied his performances. Elvis had to connect with his audience purely through his voice and the music, and something magical happened. The acoustic guitar and Elvis's voice seemed to fill every corner of that massive arena. Without amplification, without effects, without anything but pure sound, the music felt more intimate than any acoustic coffee house performance, yet more powerful than any rock concert. Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. About halfway through Love Me Tender, something beautiful began to happen. People in the audience started singing along, not loudly or aggressively, but softly, respectfully, adding their voices to Elvis's in the darkness. The effect was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. 18,000 people, invisible to each other in the complete darkness, united by nothing but the sound of music floating through the air. Elvis could hear the audience singing with him, and it seemed to inspire him to reach even deeper into his musical soul. "That's beautiful, Philadelphia," Elvis said, when the song ended. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Y'all just became my backup singers." What followed was unlike any concert Elvis had ever performed. Without his usual set list, without his band arrangements, without any of the structure that normally guided his shows, Elvis had to rely purely on his musical instincts and his connection with the audience. He performed songs he hadn't sung in years, songs that worked with simple acoustic guitar, songs that came from the deepest part of his musical memory. Blue Moon of Kentucky, the B-side of his very first record, sounded like a completely new song when stripped down to just voice and acoustic guitar. That's When Your Heartaches Begin became a conversation between Elvis and the audience, with the crowd singing the responses. Peace in the Valley turned the entire arena into a church service, with 18,000 voices joining Elvis in what felt like a spiritual experience. Between songs, Elvis began talking to the audience in a way he'd never done before. The darkness seemed to create an intimacy that made him more open, more vulnerable, more willing to share personal stories and thoughts. "You know, folks," Elvis said at one point, "I've been performing for over 20 years now, and I've gotten used to all the lights and the sounds and the spectacle. But sitting here in the dark with just this guitar, I'm remembering why I fell in love with music in the first place." He told stories about learning guitar as a teenager, about his first performance at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair, about singing in church with his mother. "Music doesn't need lights," Elvis said. "It doesn't need amplifiers or fancy equipment. It just needs a heart that wants to share something beautiful with other people." About an hour into this impromptu acoustic set, Elvis decided to try something unprecedented. "Philadelphia, I want to try something we've never done before. I'm going to start a song, and I want you all to help me finish it. If you know the words, sing along. If you don't know the words, just hum along. Let's see if we can make music together in the dark." He started playing Can't Help Falling in Love, but he sang only the first verse. Then he stopped and let the audience take over. What happened next was absolutely magical. 18,000 people, guided only by the sound of Elvis's acoustic guitar, sang the entire second verse and chorus together. In perfect darkness, they created a sound that was more beautiful than any professional choir. Meanwhile, outside the arena, emergency crews were working frantically to restore power to the area. Fire trucks were positioned around the building in case evacuation became necessary. Police were preparing for crowd control issues, but inside the arena, nobody was panicking. Nobody was demanding to leave. Nobody was causing problems. Instead, 18,000 people were having what many would later describe as the most beautiful musical experience of their lives. The emergency responders couldn't believe it, said Fire Chief Robert Murphy, who was coordinating the response that night. We were prepared for chaos, for people demanding to get out, for panic. Instead, we kept hearing this incredible music coming from inside, and people outside were actually gathering to listen. After 2 hours of this acoustic masterpiece, the power suddenly flickered back on. The stage lights blazed, the amplifiers hummed back to life, and suddenly Elvis and his audience could see each other again. The sight was incredible. 18,000 people were sitting exactly where they'd been when the lights went out, but they looked different. They looked like they'd shared something profound together. Elvis, standing center stage with just an acoustic guitar, looked around at the crowd with amazement. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, into his now working microphone. "Y'all are still here." The response was thunderous applause, but it wasn't the usual screaming and cheering. It was respectful, appreciative applause, the kind you hear at the end of a classical concert or a spiritual service. Elvis had a choice. He could put down the acoustic guitar, bring back his full band, and return to his normal electric show, or he could continue with the intimate acoustic format that had created such magic. "You know what, Philadelphia?" Elvis said. "I think we're onto something special here. What do you say we keep this going?" The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming. They wanted more of this intimate acoustic Elvis. So Elvis continued with the acoustic guitar, but now he could see his audience's faces. He could see the tears, the smiles, the looks of pure joy and connection. What was supposed to be a 90-minute concert turned into a 4-hour musical journey. Elvis performed songs he hadn't sung in decades, took requests from the audience, and created arrangements on the spot. He did acoustic versions of Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock that revealed new layers in songs everyone thought they knew by heart. He performed gospel songs that turned the arena into a cathedral of sound. He sang ballads that were so intimate and personal that people felt like they were eavesdropping on a private conversation between Elvis and his guitar. Music critics who were in the audience that night would later write that it was the most important Elvis performance they'd ever witnessed. "We saw Elvis stripped of everything but his essential musical self," wrote Rolling Stone critic John Landau. "No costume, no staging, no production, just a man, a guitar, and a voice that reminded us why he became the king in the first place." The bootleg recordings of that night became some of the most treasured Elvis recordings among collectors. But more than that, the acoustic approach Elvis discovered that night influenced how he approached music for the rest of his career. For Elvis personally, the Power Failure concert was revelatory. He'd rediscovered the joy of simple, direct musical communication that had been lost in years of elaborate production and spectacle. "That night in Philadelphia reminded me why I started making music," Elvis told reporters afterward. "It wasn't about the lights or the costumes or the big production numbers. It was about connecting with people through songs." Elvis began incorporating acoustic segments into his regular concerts, always referring back to that night in Philadelphia when the lights went out and the music got brighter. The Spectrum Arena commemorated the concert by installing a small acoustic stage in their lobby, with a plaque that read, "In memory of the night Elvis Presley proved that great music needs nothing but heart." The venue also established a policy of keeping acoustic guitars backstage at every concert, just in case of power failures. They called it the Elvis Protocol. The story of Elvis's Power Failure concert became legendary among musicians. Many artists began incorporating acoustic segments into their electric shows, inspired by Elvis's example of how intimate and powerful unplugged performances could be. The concept of unplugged concerts, which became popular in the 1990s, can trace its roots back to that night in Philadelphia when Elvis proved that sometimes less technology means more music. The Power Failure concert reminds us that the most powerful art often emerges from limitations, not from abundance. When Elvis was stripped of all his usual tools and technologies, he found something even more powerful: pure, direct human connection through music. It also shows us that audiences are hungry for authenticity. Those 18,000 people could have left when the power failed, but they stayed because they sensed they were experiencing something real and unrepeatable. On March 17, 1975, a power failure was supposed to ruin Elvis Presley's concert in Philadelphia. Instead, it revealed the essential Elvis, the musician who had fallen in love with simple songs and acoustic guitars long before he became the king of rock and roll. In the darkness of that arena, Elvis rediscovered the light that had guided him into music in the first place. And 18,000 people discovered that sometimes the most powerful performances happen when you can't see anything but can feel everything. The power came back on after 2 hours, but the magic Elvis created in the darkness lasted forever. That's the real miracle of that night in Philadelphia. Not that Elvis performed without electricity, but that he reminded everyone in that arena that the most important power source for great music isn't electrical at all. It's human. If this incredible story of finding power in powerlessness moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the magic that can happen when we strip away all the distractions and get back to what really matters. What's the most intimate musical experience you've ever had? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments when less becomes more.